Hey everybody, I hope y'all are having a great week so far. Uh, we're continuing and starting our lesson in the book of Joshua. So we're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 1 today. The past 2 weeks we've looked at kind of where Israel was in Egypt and how they got to the promised land, things that happened, things how they disobeyed God, how they didn't do what they're supposed to do. But yet we're going to see here where they're finally, here it is. We saw where they were going to be punished for 40 years. So the 40 years is over because they didn't believe that in God and the good reports, and they believed the false reports. So God made them wander for 40 years. So here we come, where after this, they're getting ready to go into the promised land. They're getting ready to take the promised land for themselves as God has commanded him. And as we looked and as we ended our lesson last week, we saw where Moses had died. Moses had died, and now we're going to see where Joshua is chosen to lead, and how that he leads the nation of Israel into the promised land. So our passage today, we're going to be reading in two different parts. We're going to be reading the entirety of the book of Joshua. Sometimes with these passages like this that are more story and more narrative, we will read more of them as opposed to some things where we may be able to read 2 or 3 verses and go deeper. So we're going to read a little bit of verses today. So just, we'll do this at 2 different times. So Joshua 1, verses 1 through 9. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, "My servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and the people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea, towards the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and courageous. Be careful to do all according to the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from the left hand or to the right or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." So here we kind of see where God puts Joshua in charge. Joshua is commissioned by God in this passage we just read. Now, as we look, we're going to see some interesting things as we look and as we dig deeper into this. And of course, we see that in the beginning of this passage, we see that Joshua was Moses' assistant. So it wasn't like he was like, anything. He was actually the second person. So it's kind of like the president and the vice president. So kind of think of it that way. He was the assistant leader of the church, of Israel. He was second in command. We see here that many times in this passage, we see these same themes that are repeated over and over and over and over again. We see them time and time again, and we'll see this, and there's a phrase that we see mentioned. We've already read it 3 times. We'll look a little bit deeper in that in a second. But, we see, God said in verse 5 that he would be with him. And that's another thing that's mentioned several times in this passage, is that God would be with Joshua. God would be with him wherever he goes. Do not be dismayed, for I am with you. A couple times it's mentioned in this passage. And it's important for us that whenever sometimes we don't think about this a lot, but whenever we read something and there's something that's mentioned or a theme or a phrase that's repeated several times over and over again, it's for a reason. And that's what we see here in Joshua. In this passage, we see, do not be dismayed, for I am with you. Don't be fearful. We see, be strong and courageous. We see that phrase 3 times just in this first 9, verses of Joshua. So we see here that, as I mentioned, Joshua's told to be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. That's great characteristics for a leader. That's great characteristics of a leader. There would be many in Israel, many people who would be fearful, many people who didn't want to go to war, many people who would have been just as happy just to settle where they were at and not leave home. But yet God told them to go and do something, and Joshua was in charge of leading the people to go and do that. And so, he would need to be a good example. He would need to be strong and courageous, to be that example of a leader, to lead the nation to what God had them to do and what God had for them. We see that, and we look at verse 7 and 8, and it talks about how that if Joshua, in order to have good success, this book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. And it's mentioned, in both of those passages, right? It's mentioned in both of those. And it was important for him to follow what Moses had taught them, to follow the law that had been given, to follow God in the way that he was supposed to. That's important for him to do. It's kind of like in your school. In your school, more than likely, you have a student handbook. Now, the student handbook is a guideline. It's rules. It's what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, things like that. And it helps. And if you follow that and you pay attention to what goes on, you do what's in the book, you'll have good success. You won't get into trouble. You'll be able to be successful in school. Well, that's what, in essence, God was telling Joshua. Was like, this book of the law, which we think about, it's the first 4 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We always refer to that as the Pentateuch, which is the law, or it's called the Book of Moses. You see those phrases mentioned several times, throughout Scripture. It's called the Book of Moses, the Law of Moses, the Law. Those are just some of the different names for the same thing. But we see that there. And so, if Joshua followed it, he would be successful. He would have the success that he needs if he followed the law and followed God. God laid out what he needed, how he was supposed to do it, and go from there. It's kind of like in the military and police and firefighters and all these things. They have standard procedures that they follow whenever certain situations happen. And so we see that and that's what God was telling Joshua here, is that this book of the law is important. Follow it, and you will be successful. You would be successful. And then in verse 9 it comes to it, and it says, God said that he would be with him wherever he goes. He would be with him. He'd be with him. Once again, that's that phrase that's repeated. A lot of times, whenever we repeat something, and we repeat something like that multiple times, we want to make sure that the person understands it. The person gets the point. Your parents have probably mentioned some things multiple times to you to make sure you understood, to make sure you know. And maybe it's if you have a curfew, they say be back by 10 o'clock. And then they say, they'll say it several times throughout the day to make sure that you understand and know that that's the expectation. Well, that's what God's telling him here. God's telling him multiple times that he's going to be with him wherever he goes. And that would have been a great comfort. You think about it. Maybe, whenever you were younger, or maybe, even now, there are things you're scared of. Maybe it's thunder, maybe it's lightning, maybe it's whatever it is that you're scared of. Sometimes you're more comfortable whenever you have a parent around. Maybe you were more comfortable when a parent was around because you knew that they were going to protect you. You knew they were going to look out for you. Well, this would have been a great comfort to Joshua, knowing that God was going to be with him wherever he went. And so that's where we kind of end this first part of our lesson today. The second part, we're going to look and we're going to see that this is in essence verses 10 through 18 are pretty much Joshua addressing the leaders of the nation for the first time as leader. So it's kind of like pretty much like if we think about a president, it's his inauguration address. It's his address to the nation through the leaders of the people, saying what things are going to happen, what we're going to do, reminding them of what and the reasons how they got to where they were. So we're going to be reading in Joshua chapter 1, verses 10 through 18. And Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan to go in and take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving to you to possess. And to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the word of Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God is providing you a place of rest and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the men of valor among you shall pass over armed before your brothers and shall help them, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers, and he has to you. and that they take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving to them. They shall return, then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess it. The land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan towards the sunrise. And they answered Joshua, all that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your word, whatever you have commanded him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Only be strong and courageous. So we see here that Joshua is preparing the nation to cross the Jordan River. And not only to cross the Jordan River, but also be prepared for battle. Be prepared to go in to take the land that God had promised to them. And so, as we look at the next couple lessons going forward, we're going to see some of those battles, some of those challenges that they had. Some of the people they had to war with, to fight, to conquer the land. And we're going to see those here. So Joshua told the nation to prepare for battle. He told them that in 3 days' time, we're going to be going over the Jordan River. So you need to be ready. Now, whenever the military or anyone else kind of sends you somewhere, you have all these people who provide everything. You got quartermasters, you got people who take your stuff. You have all these people that are supporting you going. Well, they didn't really have that in the nation of Israel. They would have had to have brought some of their own food. They would have had to have prepared their own swords, their own shields, their own spears. All the weapons they needed weren't provided to them like the military today. You go into the military, you get your M4, your sidearm, whatever it is that you're going into, or whatever weapon you need for your mission, you're given that. Well, that wasn't the case back here. And so each person had to prepare their own. So they had 3 days to prepare, to get everything ready, to get all their clothes ready so that they can go into the battle and go into the land and battle and take control of the land. Everyone had to prepare for themselves. They had to prepare the lodging, they had to prepare tents, they had to prepare all those things that, militaries and people like that take for granted now. But each one had to do their own thing at this time. So we see that the nations are told to prepare in the first two verses, verses 10 and 11 of this chapter. So, we should always be ready and prepared, for our spiritual warfare. We don't know what's going to happen or how Satan is going to attack us, but we need to constantly be ready. Sometimes we don't have 3 days notice that something's going to happen, that we're going to be tempted to sin. But yet, God can see that. God knows that. But yet we still need to be prepared. We need to be prepared and ready to go, ready to fight the devil and his minions at a moment's notice. And so, that's why it's important for us to be prepared as Christians in our society today. And then we see in verse 12 to 15, he's addressing several tribes. He's addressing the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now, these tribes were promised part of the land that before they crossed the Jordan River. So this part of the land was already taken. It was already defeated. They had already battled with it. So Joshua's telling these people, he's like, remember what Moses said. Moses said that you need to go into the land with your brothers, united as a nation, to conquer the land. We're not going to just send the tribes that, are going to conquer the land. No, everyone needs to go, and you are all one people. You all are united for that. Even though they were settling, they were told to go in and conquer the land. And Moses told them that, and Joshua was just reminding them of that. Because, we all are like this. Sometimes whenever a leader passes away or there's a transition in leadership, sometimes there's different views about, the leader or what happens. But yet we see here that the nations are saying that whatever you say, we're going to follow and believe in. We're going to follow you. We're going to follow your commands. We're going to listen to you just like we listened to Moses. And so we see that, even though they were settling on that side of the river, everything was already taken care of. They were already living in cities. The women, children, livestock, all that was staying behind. And then they sent men. They didn't send all the men because, they needed people to defend those that were staying behind. But yet they sent a lot of men in there to help fight the battles, to help fight the battles. And so some went to war, some stayed home and protected those that were at home. And so we see, in verses 16 to 18, the nation is backing up Joshua. They're saying, whatever Moses said, we're going to follow you the same as we followed Moses. There's no question in our minds. There's not. And then, it gets interesting because, they said that whoever did not follow, they would be put to death. They wouldn't stand for traitors. They wouldn't stand for people who didn't follow the leadership. They were going to take care of that right away and cut that out before it spread. And so, we see that, and that's kind of harsh, we think, but it's important for us to understand that part of it, is that, they needed to follow Joshua just as they followed Moses. And that's what the people and the leaders were saying here, is that we're with you, Joshua, we're with you. And then, for the fourth time in this chapter, we see this phrase. We see the phrase, be strong and courageous. This time, it's not God telling it to Joshua. Instead, it's the leaders of the people telling Joshua that, yes, we want you to be our leader, but we need you to be strong. We need you to be courageous. We need you to stand up for us. We need you to fight with us. We need you to show us how to be. Because Joshua was going to lead by example. If he was fearful, the people were going to be fearful. If he was scared, the people were going to be scared. If he was strong and courageous, the people would in turn be strong and courageous. And that's what we see here in this passage, is the leaders were encouraging Joshua to be strong and courageous. So we've looked at this passage, and let's just look at some things that we can apply to our lives today. God was calling the nation of Israel to go into the land and to feed the land. God calls us to do many different things. God calls us to, just like he told Joshua, to follow the book. Now, we have more of the Bible than Joshua had. We have 66 books as opposed to just 5. But yet the Bible is of vital importance to us. And if we follow it, we're going to have success in our Christian lives. If we're in the Word, studying it, learning from it, we will be successful in our Christian lives. We'll be sensitive to God's leading in our lives, whether it's telling us to go witness to somebody, whether it's the career we're going through, or maybe it's like those people, the leaders in the nation of Israel, who were saying, only be strong and courageous. They were encouraging Joshua, saying, look, we got your back. We're with you. No matter what happens, we're going to be there for you. We just need for you to be strong and courageous for us, to put forth a strong face, to put forth courage, to be courageous, and we will be there. We will fight for you. So as we go through our lives, what's God maybe calling you to do? Maybe you need someone to be a leader, to guide and direct you. Well, we're here for you. We can help you. We can help pray for you, to lead you, to encourage you. And that's what the church is all about. That's why being in church is important, because it helps us to fellowship, to be able to be encouraged and lift each other up. So as we go throughout this week, let's look for opportunities to encourage each other, to lift others up, so that even though they may be discouraged, that we can be the example of the believer that they need, so that they can become a good follower and faithful follower of Christ.